There you go. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live, our usual Thursday Facebook Live. I'm Laura Hunter from Drop the Leash Dog Training. This is Celeste Gagnon, who is with me today. She teaches classes with me at Drop the Leash. And we are here this morning for part 2 in our series of changing your dog's behavior. So last week, we talked about genetics and breeding and how they can influence your dog's behaviors and how they are responsible for many behaviors, many instinctive behaviors that it is difficult to work with and change. Today, we're going to focus more on how dogs actually learn. Learning is more under our control and it is more flexible, so we can change dogs' behaviors through learning. So as we go through, we're going to look at some common assumptions that people make about how their dogs learn. And what's the word? We're going to debunk them. We're going to talk about how maybe we should change our thoughts on that. So Celeste, you're going to keep me on task here by throwing those at me, please.
Okay.
Number one.
Number one, you are not the center of your dog's learning experience. They aren't only learning when you are actively teaching them.
Ah, yes. So everybody, including probably the dog trainer, forgets, and we think that our dogs are actually only learning when we take the time to stand in front of them with some cues and some cookies. You know, you can spend 20 minutes a day teaching your dog to sit or down or stay. But it's very interesting to know what happens in the rest of your dog's day. We don't think about what they're doing for the rest of the day. They're sleeping a lot of the time, but when they're not sleeping, they are still learning every single minute of the day. And actually, that's not even totally accurate because this morning, Celeste, you handed me a research paper. Okay, I'll let you just quickly say just mention what the research paper said, because I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it was a study about how the timing of training and sleep time for dogs can affect what they absorb. So even when they're sleeping, depending on what they've done, whether you're training them or some environmental thing going on, that's kind of when they internalize and process it all, is when they're sleeping.
Yeah, that's so cool, because now we dogs are even learning when they're sleeping. Great. So, and the interesting thing is that your dog is not only learning a lot of responses, a lot of associations that you don't necessarily see. They may be learning a lot of responses that you don't want them to. And then, you know, when these behaviors come up, we think, oh my God, why did they do that? We tend to think they're doing them deliberately, but often they've been reinforced. So dogs learn by making associations, as well as, you know, us standing in front of them, handing them a verbal, you know, signal, and then to sit, and then handing them a cookie. They learn by associations. So they're constantly paying attention to what goes on in their environment, and they're looking and watching to see what predicts what. So, you know, there's a lot of things in their environment that predict other things. And we're going to give you some examples so that is clear. Learning by association, I think, and this is not science-based, I think is a much more powerful experience than us just teaching our dogs to sit for a cookie. Certainly it's what we rely on our games program. And the interesting thing is we all learn. It doesn't matter whether we have 2 legs or 4 legs. We all learn by association. It's called classical conditioning, and it is a real thing. We just don't think about it, but we are influenced all the time by associations. So here's a dog example, and I never used to put much stock in this, as everybody used to tell me, oh my God, as soon as my dog gets up on agility day, they're nuts. And they would wind up at home for hours before they go to class. And so how is this happening? Obviously, there are things that are happening in your house or things that you are doing that day, which is a tip off to your dog that agility is happening later on that day. So somehow they know that that day predicts agility. And I used to laugh at people until I put Rosie in the 5 o'clock Sunday class in agility. And Rosie's basically out of her mind from about 10 o'clock on Sundays. Just I let her out of the crate last Sunday, and she cleared the room, landed headfirst in the closet, and then backflipped down the stairs to get to the driveway. So obviously she'd been building up to that throughout the day. So anyway, here's another example. You pick up your dog's leash in the house. Everybody says to us, oh my God, we can't even get a leash on our puppy. That's a big one in puppy program. But the leash predicts going out in the world to walk, which is so exciting. So they just go nuts when you pick up the leash. Or even if you pick up your car keys, that's another big one in my house, because Annie knows she's going and the rest are staying home because she's special. So, lots of associations. And you can make them work to your advantage. I've got a puppy client whose puppy was afraid of the car. I think she was car sick earlier, and they're doing a great job. They're using lots of food to make her feel better when she gets in the car at this point, and she's okay with the food. But the coolest thing is, he said to me the other night, he said, every time we get in the car right now, we're making sure she goes somewhere fun. So that is so cool, because for her, the car is going to start to, and it's working already. The car is going to predict, going to the pet store, going to the dog park, or going out somewhere fun, not to the veterinarian. So that's classical conditioning. That's the dog making associations. So it makes your dog, it can make your dog happy to do the stuff you want. And that is really powerful, because it's actually so much easier to work with a dog who actually wants to do what you're trying to teach them to. If you, here's another example. If, loose leash walking is like everybody's biggest, number one on the top of the charts. If you feed your dog, if you offer reinforcement to your dog every time they show up beside you on a walk, wow. Your dog's going to think, oh my God, I want to walk right beside Celeste, because every time I walk beside Celeste, it predicts good food. So I need to show up there more often, because that is like the greatest place to be. So that's about your dog just associating that spot next to you with really good stuff happening. On the flip side, dogs are, as I said, dogs can be learning stuff from their environment through association that you don't want them to. And so, again, we tend to attribute intention to our dogs, but it's not always that complicated. Here's some associations that you want. Hi, there's a squirrel. Look at all the squirrels out in the world. Oh my God, why wouldn't I want to chase those? Squirrels are everywhere. I need to go. I need to not be here with you. I need to be out in the world. Counter surfing, which is one I hear about all the time. Dogs start to make associations with kitchen counters and food. There's food on the counter. Why wouldn't I just go over there and help myself? Why wouldn't I just show up at that counter? Why wouldn't I, hang out beside the garbage can? There's great stuff in the garbage can. And the biggest association that dogs make around garbage cans and counter surfing is whether or not the owner is there. So they know if the owner is there, that they're going to get in trouble. They might get yelled at. They might, the owner might get angry, but they know completely, if they're there by themselves, that it is completely safe to help themselves to whatever is happening. So they make that association. Owner there, dangerous. Owner not there, totally safe. Cool. Go for it. I can say that because I have 3 Aussies that spend their entire life roaming the house looking for food when I'm not in the house and I know what's happening. So we're not the cleanest people in the world, not the neatest people in the world, but our coats are hung up and our kitchen is locked and there's no food on my counter. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing for our lifestyle. Yeah. So, okay. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Celeste, or should we move on? We have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, today. I think we'll move on. Everybody, I think, feels the pain of the counter surfers.
Yeah.
Unless you have a short dog.
Yes, you have a short dog, you're okay.
I have one of each. I have a counter server and one that wishes he was.
Yes.
um, I need to fix or correct my dog's behavior.
Yes. Okay. So, yes, that is, everybody asks me, how do I fix or correct my dog's behavior? And certainly it's not, that's not the wrong thing to be thinking, but I think it will be more helpful if we reframe it. Because if you can start by understanding that your dog actually doesn't think he needs to be fixed. What he's doing that you don't want him to actually works really well for him. And again, dogs do not have an ulterior motive. If there's a behavior there, either it's filling a need in the dog, and that's what we went through last week when we were talking about genetics and breeding, is that we breed the desire for these behaviors into dogs, or they have these behaviors to survive, they need them to survive. We can't fix those, and we can't correct them. And the other, number two, is that often the behaviors we don't want have been inadvertently reinforced by us. And I can think of a really good example of that in agility, not when we're running agility, but when we're all standing around. I don't know if you know what track I'm going down. I just thought of this. But if you watch when we're all standing around waiting for a turn in agility, we're all feeding our dogs for being on those beds.
Yeah.
And I would like to bet that every one of us at one point has looked at our dog and said, "Oh, you just barked for food and I fed you." Because we're not totally paying attention to the dogs. But yeah. I do it all the time. And I hear everybody saying that to their dog quite often, because we're trying to keep them calm and quiet. And we're watching agility and the dog barks. So we just feed them, just hand them a piece of food to quiet them down. Oh my God, they've trained us all to feed them when they bark. So we there's probably a million examples I could give, but that was the one that popped into my head just now.
Yeah, no, that's a fair one.
And we're all supposed to be experienced dog people. Oh gosh, hello.
But you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so easy to let them train us and reinforce us, So what we need to think of instead is, instead of how do I fix this behavior, we need to think of how can I replace this behavior?
Yeah.
So as I said, the correcting part is usually reactive. And often we try and do it after the dog has already done what we didn't want them to. And by that point, the dog has probably already self-reinforced. So jumping is a really good example to give everybody, because I see it a lot. The dog jumps up on you or on somebody who's there with you, and you push them down and you yell off, but the dog's already achieved its goal, which is jumping up on the human, because they want to get closer to their faces and interact with them. So you're already behind the 8 ball there on that one. And what also happens, there's a couple other things that happen too in that jumping example, is that the attention that we give them when we think we're correcting them might be really reinforcing too. So, it's just like kids. Sometimes any attention, even negative, can be reinforcing for kids. They don't care if you're yelling at them or not. You're just paying attention to them.
Yeah.
So, the dogs are like, "Oh, wow, cool. We're playing this really cool game where I jump up and they push me back and we're wrestling. I love this." And then what happens is, if you do correct, it depends on how people correct this. Certainly puppies are pretty sensitive. So shouting at a puppy is an aversive way of dealing with it that can frighten puppies. There's the old system where you knee them in the chest. So you can use these methods too. They're aversive. They're unpleasant, and aversive methods might suppress the behavior temporarily, but it's quite likely that they're eventually going to go back to what they were doing, because it's really hard for dogs to figure out what not to do. It's so much easier if you give them something else to do that's so much more tangible and concrete for them. And, no matter how frustrated you are, and God knows all these puppy people out here these days, we totally understand your frustration, but you want to stop and think, do you really want to frighten your dog into behaving? And I use behaving quotes.
The other thing with that is that, to me, reinforces the idea of the dog seeing if you're around before doing something.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like if the person is there and then the correction or whatever is unpleasant for me, then I'm just going to do it when they're not there.
Yeah, exactly. House training certainly is a big one for that. People, you can actually get reverse house training by, shouting at your dog when it pees on the floor, and then the dog's afraid to pee when you're around. And I have had cases where people could not get their dogs even to pee in their backyards. They couldn't get the dog to pee at all when they were with them. So yeah, that's a good point for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that could happen with a lot of behaviors, is that, even barking, dogs know it's safe to stand at the window and bark when their owners aren't home. But when the owners are home, they know it's dangerous or it's not a good thing. So it's not going to, although, I'll have to be perfectly honest. I don't really think that when they are, when we are not home, the dog is going to think, well, I'm pretty sure I should do an alternative behavior, but we know enough to put management in place at that point, hopefully.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
But still, we do not want to be aversive with our dogs. We do not want to upset them. So, yes.
So what does being proactive look like?
Okay. One simple sentence: have a plan. So you want to think to yourself three things. You want to work through three things. Oh God, my mouth is not working today. I'm so sorry. How do I prevent it? How do I replace it? And how do I maintain it? So those are the big three. And certainly, how do I prevent it is huge. And that is management, which we consider the backbone of training. Because if you cannot manage to prevent your dog from practicing the behavior and inadvertently getting reinforced, you are not going to be successful, no matter how great a trainer you are. So how do you prevent the dog from practicing behaviors? Usually boundaries, leashes, X-pens, gates, crates. You can, there's stuff that's more subtle than that too. Removing any triggers from your dog's environment. If you have a multi-dog household where there are arguments over toys and resources, you take the toys away in the house, or you make sure that, if one dog has access to it, the other dogs don't. We do walks at work, which is about dog reactivity, and it's certainly expanded into not just on leash, but it's windows and backyards too. And the biggest thing we tell people, if you want to reduce your dog's reactivity, you have to prevent them from access to other dogs on leash, and you have access to windows and free access to your backyard. Because as long as they can access all of those and continue to bark, then you're going to be going backwards no matter how much you try to train. So the hardest part of management, especially in the case of reactivity, is that we often have to change our lives. And that's tough. And a lot of people are very resistant to doing that. Or a lot of people, because they have a complicated life, it is difficult, Counter surfing, you've got to keep your kitchen locked. If you're not going to keep your counters bare, you've got to, our kitchen is locked. It's easy in our house because we don't have kids running around, and we have a house where you can easily gate the doors. But not everybody does. If you live in an open concept house and you have kids, you're going to have a hard time. Well, not a hard time. You'll have an expensive time. You can buy those amazing, gorgeous, gates that go across all those wide areas, but they're not inexpensive. And you've got kids who leave stuff out everywhere. So it's hard to do. My biggest one right now, the biggest issue I'm having with management is that people, I guess dogs are out more and it's spring and, people are out more with their dogs, is that I've had people asking me about recall because, people are finding their dogs do not have a great recall out in the world. So, we've had a couple of dogs, get in trouble over the past several weeks. And people say to me, how do I fix this? And I say, you put them back on a long line. But people, that doesn't always sit well with everybody because people, I feel that their dogs need to have access to that freedom to, go out in the forest and run and be free and wild. Somebody, that wasn't one of my clients that said that, but I did hear that lately. Dogs need to be free and wild. But I happen to think that with freedom comes responsibility. So you're never going to teach a recall if you don't keep your dog on a long line, prevent them from chasing squirrels and whatever else is out there in the forest. So, and sometimes management can be the entire solution. That is, that makes it so easy for people. Not everybody wants to try and teach their dogs alternative behaviors, and sometimes you can get away with not having to do that if you are willing to put the boundaries and the management in place. Walking on a loose leash is an example of that. People desperately want their dogs to walk on loose leashes, but Celeste, you and I both know, and I think everybody knows, how much work and time goes into actually getting your dog to walk on a loose leash. And the other question is, should your dog have to walk beside you on a loose leash for an entire walk? And our answer, of course, is no. So what we do now, especially if we have young dogs, puppies, or, if people say, well, I just don't want to spend all that time, we just say, anti-pulling equipment is great. Get a double hook harness and a line you can double hook your dog to, or get a head halter. Head halters are more work for people. Every dog is okay with a harness. And to be honest, that's what I do in the forest with my dogs, is I just put them on their harnesses, and Annie, I double clip because she wants to track coyotes, and I don't feel like working against coyote tracks, so I just let her pull a bit, and I'm okay with that. She's not dragging me off my feet. So management's okay. So here's a couple more examples, because I think people need to see exactly what it is. If you've got a dog that jumps, just don't let it get to people. Have it, if you've got, if people are coming in the house and the dogs are super excited and they want to go and jump on them, just keep the dog in the kitchen until you can get a leash on the dog and take the dog out to meet the guests, but take food with you and teach the dog to lie down or be calm, or, play a food game. So they're looking at food on the floor instead of jumping up to people. So, that's a good example of management there. And as I said, management for recall, management for long lines, so that the dog doesn't get to run off, so that you can have success calling the dog because they are in a long line, they can't run away from you, and you can use super high value reinforcers because the dog isn't taking off. So recall is about reinforcement. So you have to have a chance to get to your dog to reinforce them, so that they know the next time they're going to get reinforced, and chances are they're going to come back. Okay. Okay, what's next? I've done management to death here.
To decide on a specific replacement behavior.
Okay, yeah, that's the biggie. That is the biggie. So the best question you can ask yourself is, where is the value for my dog? What exactly are they doing that works for them? And the reason I try and get people to frame it in this way is because it keeps reminding us that we actually have to provide more value for an alternative behavior. So you've got to come up with a specific alternative behavior, and you want your dog to love that alternative behavior. So you're not fixing your dog. What you're doing is you're teaching a behavior that you like, and you're going to reinforce the dog so much that they like it too. So it is really important that you think about it in terms of value, I think. So if your dog wants to jump up, but he gets reinforced for playing a game, and he gets lots of reinforcements, and he gets to play a game with you where he keeps 4 feet on the floor, he's going to keep 4 feet on the floor. And we know we use the orientation game all the time. And I already, pulled out the example of pulling on leash. If you reinforce your dog enough for being beside you, and we play Magic Hand, and we've got the 1, 2, 3 game, your dog is going to be happy to do that instead. So there's where, in that alternative behavior, you are classically conditioning your dog to like, to think really great positive things about doing that alternative behavior. Instead of running to the door to greet people, reinforce heavily for your dog being on a mat. Teach them that a mat is the greatest place to be. Certainly we have dogs who think that mats are absolutely fantastic. My husband was putting beds together in the living room yesterday. I took a video of him trying to get Rosie off the top of the bed on the floor before he could put the feet on. He couldn't get the feet on because he couldn't get her off the mat on the floor. So that's what you want. And we just, what we did. And another example, instead of begging at the table, mats are fantastic. That's an interesting one because you could actually just do management, which is put your dog in a crate with something really good to chew on. Yeah. So people are always want to know how to keep their dog from begging at the table. You could just go management, the crate, if your dog likes the crate and you give them something great. Or instead of begging at the table, they could go and lie down on a mat near the bed, near the table, so you can reinforce. I actually taught my guys to lie under the table, and they're quite happy lying under the table. They don't beg. So, all those are alternative behaviors. And then your third thing you need to think about here is that you need to build a history of success and reinforcement for that. And again, that is, I go back to classical conditioning, where if you build that reinforcement history over time, you're going to have a dog who, is happy to give you that behavior. And if you build success instead of correction, your dog is also that's also reinforcing for a dog. Humans and animals are way more motivated if they can experience success than failure. So what we want to do is specifically teach the behavior in a calm situation out of the context in which it's a problem. So, we know that with our reactive dog program is that we keep people from going out into the world with those techniques we give them for quite a while, because we want the dog to really build the behavior where they can be successful with it, so they want to continue to do it. So it definitely needs to be done without the trigger being around, and then you just practice and reinforce over and over and over again until it's almost an automatic response. And I think you and I do have a lot of automatic responses from our dogs. Certainly going to bed for all of our dogs is an auto response.
Yeah, but that's again because of how much reinforcement we've put on.
Yeah. We can probably think of a million, but people don't really need to hear about that.
But how good our dogs are.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And sometimes not so good because they're hurting dogs. We won't get into that.
They have their moments.
Yeah, we already did that in another Facebook Live. And then you very, very gradually, just add distractions and higher excitement, but you do it one tiny step at a time where your dog is going to be always successful,
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, I'm
So
losing where I am right now. Yeah. What's next, Celeste?
when can I stop reinforcing my dog for the behavior?
Okay. Never. One word, never. Okay,
Pretty much.
I need to expand on that. This is one of the biggest reasons, I think, for training failing. And yeah, I absolutely. So let me give everybody my little story that I always think hopefully illustrates this. And I'm going to it's a human analogy. Let's say that you applied for a new job at a company and they said, yeah, come on, we'll take you on. We're going to give you a 3-month training program and see how it goes at the end of it. So you go there and you work and learn for 3 months and they pay you for doing it. And you get lots of, encouragement. People are supportive and they praise you for doing everything well. And then at the end of 3 months, your boss comes to you and he goes, well, it's been fantastic. You have learned everything you need to do this job really well. We would love to have you come and work for us. But because you know everything, you've learned everything and you know it all now, we don't think we need to pay you for doing this job. And that's the most ridiculous thing in the world, right? It's such a stupid thing. But that's exactly what we are doing to our dogs. And why do we think we should stop paying for our dogs for responses just because they've learned them? Why should we stop paying our dog for a recall just because we've learned it? The dog has learned it. It just doesn't make sense. Actually, I think that goes with the next question, right? What's the next one?
The next one is, when we hear regularly, shouldn't the dog just do it?
Yeah, which goes hand in hand with when can we stop feeding them?
Yeah.
Because they're not just going to do it. They don't even know they should just do it. They're not kids. Although, they are our kids in a way. We don't think of them as our children, let's face it. But our kids grow up and they mature, and hopefully they realize that there are things that they should just do in life because they're just supposed to do them, like clean your room and be polite and say thank you and, be a good citizen. But our dogs don't mature. Our dogs pretty much stay, they remain as 3-year-old toddlers, really. I think that's probably about the level of maturity and cognitive function and emotional response that you're going to get from your dog. They're not going to grow up and think, oh my God, I should just do this because Laura wants me to.
I think the other, the other part of that to me is the behaviors that we expect them to continue are not dog behaviors.
Absolutely not.
I'm thinking just the the counter surfing, for example, anything that is more of a survival instinctual thing for them. You can teach them not to do it, but if they don't continuously get reminded and rewarded for doing that behavior, they're not going to continue. I mean, it's not.
Absolutely.
So to me, it's almost not even necessarily a maturity thing, but you're looking at a completely different species. Their needs and drive is totally different than ours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't think of one thing that we really would like our dogs to do, or most people would like our dogs to do, that is intrinsically motivating for our dogs.
Well, exactly.
I think it was that the last Facebook Live, we said that there's a list of what we want, a list of what they wanted, and there wasn't one match. No. Yeah. So, it's kind of like, if you want to put it in human terms, it's like going to a job you can't stand every day, or a job that you're at least ho hum about. The only reason you're going to go is because you get paid for it. I think it's the same thing with our dogs. And you're right. They're pretty simplistic. I think there's not one dog that's going to sit in the kitchen and stare at a roast beef on the counter and say, oh my goodness, I think I remember Laura saying that I really shouldn't have anything to do with that. So even though they're not there, I should just do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
No dog ever.
Your dog's going to be a good citizen and not steal the pot roast.
Yeah, I think they're pretty more. They did that one day in my kitchen, so I use it as an example. I was vacuuming in the living room, and this was before Maddie, took over the kitchen, and I stopped the vacuum, and there was this dead silence. And I thought, okay, because you need to hear silence in a multi-dog house. We worry, and there they were with a prime rib on the floor. Yeah, and they just looked at me. Like, yeah, so what's the problem? They weren't going, oh my God, she caught us. They're just like, yeah, so what's your problem?
They found dinner for you.
Yeah, I know. They also ate the top of lasagna one day when Brett had his buddies over, and I was up in the arena, and I just, for some reason, I just thought, oh my God, the lasagna's on the kitchen counter and all the guys are sitting on the back deck drinking beer, and I don't see any dogs out there with them. And sure enough, they ate the top. They only ate the top layer, which was really good. And everybody got ticked off about that. They were angry with the dogs. And I'm going, seriously, come on, they weren't dog people. So yeah. It's exactly, they're pretty simplistic. If it works, if they do something and they get reinforced, it works. Yeah. And that's, that is, and if they bark, it works. That is pretty much how their brains work, So, but we can utilize that. Throw food, Brett. They're barking at you. Throw food.
You want some lasagna?
Yeah, go give them some lasagna. I'll give you one more human analogy. We do the same thing. We find favorite restaurants and we go to our favorite restaurants and we love it there. And we go every week because it's great food. And we have one up in Caledon that we love to go to. But the reason we go there is because the guy who runs the place is just so fantastic. The food is good too. And every time we make a reservation, not that we're going right now, the first thing we say is Wayne going to be there? And if Wayne's not there, we're not going. So, if we don't continue to get reinforced, if we don't continue to get that great stuff, we start not showing up, So if your dog is not going to get great stuff coming back from a recall, they're going to stop showing up. So dogs aren't any different than us, really. I threw this in because yesterday I was watching something on Chirag Patel's Facebook page. He's a big name trainer, very good trainer. And he had the most amazing quotation. I don't even think it was his. I think he got it from somebody else. And it was, behavior goes where reinforcement flows. And I thought that just completely says it all right there.
Yeah.
And I know I want a t-shirt. We're getting t-shirts that say that. I just love that. And I guess the more simplistic version of that is Sandy in my 5 o'clock agility class is really cool, said cookies replace leashes, which I think is also a really good one too. Because that, certainly, if you want your dog beside you on a leash, it's not going to be the leash that does it. It's going to be the cookies. So I thought that was brilliant. That can go on the back of the t-shirt. So, yeah. Okay, so let's move on.
So
I think we're getting to the end here. Yep.
Yeah, we're close. He only listens to me in the house. Nothing works outside.
Yes, which is the whole reason that we have Games That Train for people, because that is the whole point of Games That Train. And that is a source of huge frustration for people. Absolutely. And especially during COVID, because people are doing more training in the house, but not getting out quite so much. And, the other thing too is that dogs are not getting out as much. And even before COVID, our dogs, I'm not sure how many dogs get out of the house enough. So what happens is when we do get them out in the world, they're just totally overwhelmed. And I was listening to Kim Brophy the other day, and she said, yeah, a lot of dogs spend 10, 12 hours a day in their houses waiting for people to take them out on 2 walks or get them out in the backyard for 20 minutes or so. But dogs weren't built to be in houses. They were built to be out exploring the world. The world is Disneyland for dogs. And so the minute you step out the door, of course, you've lost your dog. You've lost your dog to the smells, to the other dogs, to people that they can go and greet. I actually think it's easier having fearful dogs out in the world sometimes, or not fearful, but shyer dogs out in the world than it is having pro-social dogs out in the world, because they want to meet and greet every single dog and human that they lay eyes on, because especially right now, they're so sick of us in the house. So like, they're over us. They spent too much time with us. So, there's things to chase, there's stinky stuff to roll in. It's just, you are fighting the biggest competition of your life when you take your dog out the door, and the environment doesn't even require anything of our dogs. It's not saying, well, you have to sit, you have to stay, you have to lie down, you have to walk beside me, pay attention to me. The environment's just saying, I'm a squirrel, chase me. I'm a stinky smell me. I'm just out there for the taking. So it is really hard to get your dogs focused on you out in the world. And then the second problem is that dogs don't really generalize well over different situations. Their learning is very context specific. It is so context specific. Let me give you an example. We see it in the program when people have taught their dogs to sit. And almost everybody teaches their dog as puppies to sit in front of them, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great place for your dog to sit if you want to teach your dog to sit, because they're looking right at you. But then they come to agility or they come to games, and we want the dog to sit beside them. And most people can't even get beside their dogs. The dogs are a little nervous about people kind of being that close to them, surprisingly enough. And the dog simply has absolutely no idea that when people say sit, that sit beside is the same as sit in front. So sit in front, when your dog's in front of you and you say sit and you reinforce them, dog is thinking, okay, when I'm directly in front of my owner, they make that weird sound, and that means I should put my butt in the ground and look at them, and they're going to give me a cookie. That does not translate to when my owner makes that weird sound again, I should go around beside them and put my butt in the ground beside them this time and look up at them, and they'll give me a cookie. These are two totally different exercises for a dog. Mm-hmm. So people generalize totally. Dogs are into details. So it is really hard for them to go out into the world and do the same behaviors in a totally different situation. So going from the house to going out in the world is like going from a level 1 difficulty to like a level, 300, 400, 500. So there's a way to get around it, obviously. And again, it's you build you build the behavior in the house, you practice it, you give your dog lots of successful repetitions that you can reinforce, and then you open your door and maybe take it out to your porch, or you take it to your backyard or your driveway. We've had dogs who couldn't even do that. All we did was open the door and they practiced in the front hallway because they lost their minds when they went out the door. So you just make it as easy as possible for your dog, and you do it in tiny, tiny, tiny increments, so that you can take it to the backyard on the driveway and then the sidewalk, and then maybe you can do it on a quiet walk when there are no distractions, and then you can take it maybe to the park. Dog park is way off, and you keep them on long lines, and you'll have a hope of getting it. But the problem is that humans are impatient, and sometimes our expectations of what our dogs can do are too high. So we want the dog to be able to do it. And I'm as guilty as that of that as anybody. I don't know if for some reason it's Annie. I'm constantly thinking Annie's, my expectations have been too high for many times in training. I've had to smack myself in the head and backtrack. So, we have to go at the dog's speed, which is not our speed. And that's hard. But the more you do it, the more you generalize, the easier it gets for the dogs. And what I tell people to do in the beginning is when you take it outside the house, just pretend the dog's never done it before and start over. That's the easiest thing to do. And then you'll be frustrated. Use higher value reinforcement out in the world. We're big proponents of teaching your dog to work for their daily food allowance, which is kibble out in the world too. But in the beginning, you may have to use a higher reinforcer, or you might have to mix a higher reinforcer in with your kibble, which also works really well. So the dog never quite knows what they're getting. And you have to make it easier, and you have to play for a shorter time. So you just have to make all those parameters much easier. So, even here, like on the property, I can play games and throw kibble like 50 miles, and my dogs run and find it in the grass and they come back. If I was going to town, they probably couldn't do that, because they never go to town. It would be Disneyland, or for Annie, it might be a nightmare, but it's either way. But if I was doing it there, I would still be playing the same game, but I'd be dropping something of much higher value like cheese almost at my feet. So it would be easier for them to be successful. And I wouldn't start in the middle of a crowd of people. I would go find a quiet place in town to do it. So you do want to build that reinforcement history at all those different levels, which is hard for people to do, I think, super hard. But you can only work at the dog's level of success. And, if the dog isn't getting it, if they are making mistakes out there in the world, it's not their fault. It really isn't. Because really the dog can only work with the information that you're giving them in that situation. And if they are all those super high value distractions out there, they can't process that information anyway. So you got to work on the dog's time, and you have to own the mistake. You really do. So I think that we covered everything we wanted to cover today. Actually, are there any comments or questions that you have?
Well, Susan made a comment, our vet friend, about the shepherds, the biting incident at the White House, and that the shepherds aren't there anymore. But to me, I know we're not going to really get into it too much, but that to me is a perfect example of a younger dog who's trained in a certain environment, in a certain lifestyle, and then gets moved to a new place and is expected to behave the same way.
Yes. Michael Shikashio, actually, yes. I think he's our hero.
I know he's done some interviews today, I think, about it.
Yes. So for anybody who doesn't know who Michael Shikashio is, he is probably the god of fear and aggression in dogs. He runs. I've taken all his courses, and he is just the most fantastic guy. He organizes that big conference, fear and aggression in dogs, and he's like the ultimate expert. And he said the same thing. He said they took the dogs, put them in a totally new situation, probably overwhelmed them with new people and stimulation. The dogs couldn't listen, and the dogs also were probably a little bit nervous. And obviously, they didn't go. I hate to sort of dump on the president of the United States, but obviously didn't work the dogs up step by step to being comfortable in that environment. And so when dogs are overwhelmed and frustrated and frightened, they do respond in a way that is natural to them. Dogs have teeth. So I don't think any trainer out there heard that story and thought that the dog deliberately attacked somebody. I think the first thing that went through my head was, he was in over his head and something scared him, and maybe didn't have the chance to get out of the situation. Because usually if it's fight or flight, most dogs will pick flight, but if they can't, they'll pick fight.
Yeah.
You know? So, and that's an interesting question, because next week,
Yes.
today we were talking about changing behaviors, but next week we're going to talk about working with dogs who are fearful, because it's not so much about changing a behavior in those dogs as it is about changing their emotional response to things. So
Yeah.
it's a different type of learning for them totally than just teach them an alternative behavior. There's more to it. So that's what we're talking about next week. Are there any other questions or comments, Celeste, or are we're done?
Yeah, I think we're done. One is more specific, so I'll let you get to that one later.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry if, everybody jumped on today hoping that we were going to give them a whole bunch of really specific training plans for changing specific behaviors. But, and we put a lot into this, but if you go back, and sort of listen to the section on, having a plan, and because that's pretty much what every trainer teaches, is that put management into place, figure out what alternative you want the dog to have instead, build huge value for it, and then reinforce and practice for success. If you apply it to, any issues, any behaviors that you want to get rid of, it actually, you can do it. You can do it. So it'd be interesting if anybody tried that this week and wanted to get back to us next week in our live, or, just put a comment up on the, underneath the live when it comes up recorded. And, maybe what we'll do is the week after next, maybe we might throw out a question and answer, for an hour, and help people work through that process, and maybe come up with some examples. We'll see. So anyway, thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Susan, for bringing up Biden and Major, and that was a good one for us to talk about. Worked nicely to stay next week. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section. I'll try and get to everybody. And please join us next week, because now we're moving from a 2-part series to at least a 3-part series. It might be the series that never ends. Who knows? So again, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Celeste. Everybody have a good week and stay safe. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Take care.